If you're a Final Fantasy XIV player, then I want you to answer the following question in the comments. In 10 years, when the final expansion of whatever story arc began with Dawntrail is released, will its dungeons be structured using the same template that's been used for the last 10 years? Now, if the answer is yes, then ask yourself, are you okay with that? This video isn't another critical essay piece about Dawntrail's numerous narrative failures, or 14's death spiral towards an end-of-service announcement. While it is clear there's an appetite for an anti-14 sentiment online, I'm not interested in feeding into that any further. As a matter of fact, it's my opinion that the temperature of the discourse surrounding Final Fantasy XIV could stand to cool off a bit. Instead, this video aims to look towards the future of the ecosystem and to reevaluate perceptions about the game as Dawntrail approaches a more content-complete state. There are a lot of angles to discuss here, from questions about the production realities of Creative Studio 3 to the self-sabotage caused by evergreen content, to what the next 10 years of Final Fantasy XIV will look like, among other things. So park yourself in Limsa, pick your favorite looping emote, and enjoy. Before we can begin in earnest, here's my 5-second Patreon pitch. Get all videos 2 days early and ad-free for only $1 a month. It's the best deal in town. In 2019, I purchased Final Fantasy XIV and opened a subscription. That subscription remained active until November of last year, if I remember correctly. While my decision to step away from the game was in part due to the feeling of despondency that Dawntrail's narrative gave me, it was also the result of becoming fully aware of the driving force behind Creative Studio 3's development philosophy, which has nothing to do with making a great game and everything to do with establishing an efficient, cheap, and lean production pipeline. I would urge you to listen to Yoshi-P's comments about dungeon design during his interview with Preach, who asked the following.
Expand on that to dungeon design. We did the new dungeon today. It's great, but it follows the exact same structure that we've seen in every dungeon since Stormblood. Is that something internally you feel is the perfect dungeon experience? Because it hasn't changed in years? Or is that something else where you think we could maybe you want to loosen up the reins?
Yoshi-P responded by explaining that dungeon design and presumably all content in the game is developed within the framework of packages, as he calls them, and that he had no intention of straying from that blueprint.
First and foremost, we have something that's easily understood. It's a blueprint of sorts, and I call it a package.
You can very clearly see the influence of this design by package approach across all expansions, which are functionally identical to one another. You can reasonably assume that whatever expansion will be released next will have 6 zones, a dungeon at every odd level, and a trial at levels 103, 109, and 110. Those zones will be populated by fates, which will receive no updates or innovations. Those dungeons will be structured as you've all come to expect. The trials will take place on circular stages. We've played these games before. That realization was the primary driving force behind my decision to cancel my subscription after a half-decade with the game. I asked myself the same question that I asked all of you at the beginning of this video, and my answer was a firm yes. The dungeons will be the same in 10 years, and no, I'm not okay with that. When we talk about the future of Final Fantasy XIV, we have to acknowledge the production realities dictating the game's ongoing development. During Endwalker's marketing cycle, Yoshi-P said in an interview with PC Gamer that the expansion would have 30% more story and cutscenes than Shadowbringers. The consensus from players at the time was that Endwalker had earned its lengthy runtime. Dawntrail was nearly as long, all the while lacking the same intrigue, anticipation, and narrative heft which justified Endwalker's length. This revealed to me that even the narrative had its own Yoshi-P package dictating its development. For Endwalker to be completed, the team would have had to establish new workflows, resource spending limits, and internal processes to accommodate that expansion's larger scope, which means that an infrastructure was in place by the time that Dawntrail would have become the focal point of Creative Studio 3's efforts. So the result was an expansion with a scope to match the studio's production pipeline, not its narrative merits. In a more recent interview with PC Gamer, Yoshi-P commented that his team could have diverted some of Dawntrail's story to the side quest, which makes me wonder who the hell is directing the studio, but it also lends credence to my observation about the production realities of Final Fantasy XIV. The next 10 years of this game will be a series of slightly altered packages driven not by vision or by innovation, but by workflows and budget spreadsheets.
Bask in the spotlight and burn, baby, burn!
Everything I've said in the last minute is to establish in no uncertain terms what Final Fantasy XIV has always been and will always be. Despite that, I found myself logging in to stand around in Limsa Limensa a couple of weeks ago. During my time away from 14, I reflected a great deal on whether or not I wanted to continue to invest money and, more importantly, time in this ecosystem. Dawntrail was a sobering experience, as its total narrative failure served to dissipate the emotional connection that I had to 14's world. It was liberating, actually, because I felt that I could examine the game from a more dispassionate and temperate point of view, allowing me to decide to return to the game for its merits, not because I was in love with Y'shtola. Its imperfections are stark and glaring, of course. I mean, I fully expect that fates will never be updated, that the dungeon package will never change, that the tome cap will never be adjusted, that the savage lockout will never be lifted at earlier stages of future patches, and that the open world will never be used for anything more than set dressing for the main story quest. Being fully aware of its limitations, right? Eyes wide open, I can still confidently say that 14 is a fantastic MMORPG, even during what has been its most contentious expansion cycle. With current attitudes being what they are, I think that bears mention. The immediate future of Final Fantasy XIV looks, in my estimation, promising, but the long-term future is far less certain. Let me explain. By the time that Dawntrail's holistic contributions to 14's content suite are released, the game will be all the better for it. A new field operation, a new crafting and gathering hub, a new limited job, and undoubtedly a series of fantastically designed combat encounters to dig your teeth into. Narrative issues aside, Dawntrail will expand the list of things to do in Final Fantasy XIV that players who discover the game across the next decade can enjoy. This is the benefit of holistic, evergreen game design. What isn't often discussed, though, is how that evergreen approach can suffocate a digital ecosystem just as effectively as it can bolster it. And no other title in the MMO genre is in as much danger of crumbling under the weight of evergreen design as Final Fantasy XIV. Let's assume for the sake of this hypothetical that Occult Crescent is a massive hit. At release, a person who has never played 14 hears about the mode and decides to watch a stream to see what all the fuss is about. The player thinks to himself, okay, that looks like a lot of fun. So he suffers through the process of creating a Square Enix account, manages to install the game, and begins his journey in Final Fantasy XIV. There's something like 300 to 400 hours of narrative between setting foot in Ul'dah for the first time and getting to play Dawntrail's field operation. The more that time passes, the greater that distance becomes. Can you even imagine trying to play Final Fantasy XIV as a new player at the end of the 10-year arc that we're supposedly on? Can you imagine asking someone in 2034 to trudge through A Realm Reborn while the increasingly competitive gaming market continues to offer more engaging experiences at a lower cost of entry? The sudden drop in writing quality in Dawntrail is a problem. The paint-by-numbers package design for everything is a problem. The scheduling of content releases is a problem. They aren't existential problems, though. Writing can improve, designs can change, schedules can shift. What is existential is how increasingly unapproachable Final Fantasy XIV is becoming with each major patch cycle. To add insult to injury, that unapproachability is the most boring in the genre. Hear me out, because this isn't going to make a lot of sense at first. In many ways, 14's growing onboarding issue resembles that of Lost Ark, which is populated by less than 1% of its peak concurrent player count. That game is stuffed full of evergreen legacy systems that new players are forced to interact with. All the while, the infrastructure that once supported those dated systems has been abandoned, since the few players who remain in that ecosystem are at the cutting edge of content. Therefore, the only players who are served by that ecosystem are the ones who are already entrenched. Lost Ark is an example of an MMO being buried under its own evergreen vertical progression systems. 14 is similar, although the vertical progression system in this comparison is the bloated and increasingly fattening main story quest. Just like 14, there is a salve to the onboarding issue in Lost Ark. You can just buy a a power pass, and jump to the beginning of the newest area. During yet another interview with PC Gamer in early 2024, Yoshi-P was asked if Creative Studio 3 was exploring the option to allow new players to begin their journeys at Dawntrail rather than A Realm Reborn, which is a reasonable idea since Dawntrail ostensibly represents the beginning of a separate 10-year story arc. His response to the question was, and I quote, "For the story, we are not currently planning any kind of new skip feature. I'm concerned that if the globally acclaimed storyline can be skipped through a function, the value of the FF14 game will be diminished. So far, FF14 has been able to continue to grow while keeping the story as the main focus." A couple of things about that. First, it's obvious that Yoshi-P is immensely proud of the acclaim that Final Fantasy XIV's story has garnered. He should be proud. Final Fantasy XIV's story is incredible, right up until Endwalker's post-expansion patches, but that's neither here nor there. If there is any resistance to the idea of skipping the journey altogether to make 14 more approachable to new players, then it would obviously come from Yoshi-P himself. All those years, all that work, all that pride, I completely get it. What's more important than that is the second comment in that quote. As long as 14 was experiencing growth, and there was no reason to question its story focus. We know now that the game has not experienced that same growth that it enjoyed in the lead up to Endwalker. If there has ever been a better time to implement a path for new players to circumvent hundreds of hours of requisite reading, then it's whenever there's a new field operation to immediately jump into. In addition to the length of the main story quest being an inhibitor for new players, there's a new variable that has to be considered in order for the future of Final Fantasy XIV to be properly examined. Dawntrail has introduced the possibility that the game's story will simply continue to suck. That is a hard pill to swallow, but hear me out. 14's narrative has not found its footing since April 2022 when Newfound Adventure was released. That is nearly 3 full years to the day of recording this audio, during which the story has failed to reach the heights that we've come to expect. Keep in mind that post-Endwalker and Dawntrail represent the quality in storytelling that Creative Studio 3 is capable of, even during the unbelievable and totally unexpected windfall that followed the Shadowlands exodus towards the end of Shadowbringers' life cycle. With all of that good fortune at their backs, Creative Studio 3 gave us Wook. Please do yourselves a favor and stop expecting this studio to ever recapture the magic of Shadowbringers. It is not gonna happen. Listen, I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm trying to be pragmatic. It's one thing for 14's story focus to present an inordinate time sink to new players. It's another thing entirely for that time sink to also suck. This studio needs to realize that a continued narrative focus above all else at the pace and the quality that's been established post-Endwalker in the last 3 years is a vice grip that will suffocate the game and prevent the ecosystem from garnering new players, which is critical for the long-term health of Final Fantasy XIV. For an example of the worst case scenario, again, see Lost Ark. As I read over this script, there's a question that I can't help but ask myself, and it's a bit embarrassing to answer. Why do I care so much? I can't explain to you what this instinct is, to sit down and write a 5-page essay piece pontificating on the future of a video game, but that's the thing about MMOs. They aren't just games, they're dynamic ecosystems that host digital extensions of ourselves, which, in my mind, makes them endlessly interesting to talk about. In the case of Final Fantasy XIV, that interest is driven by an enthusiasm for what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest contributions to the MMO genre in the history of the industry, which is marred by a laundry list of stupid, self-inflicted issues that should be easily solved. I'd like to leave you with this. Anyone who believes that 14 is dead, dying, in a state of managed decline, or careening headfirst towards end of service is completely out of their mind. While I do believe that 14 needs to address the growing issue that its bloated main story quest presents for onboarding new players, as well as everything else that I mentioned in the video, I have no doubt in my mind that this MMO will continue to succeed even if its best days are already behind it. Let me tell you why I'm so certain. Look at this. This is Guild Wars 1. I started playing it for the first time just over a week ago, and I'm having a blast. See them? Those are other players also enjoying this 20-year-old MMO. Let me blow your mind. You don't have to be preoccupied with demographic shifts or worried that you aren't investing your time in the right ecosystem, whatever that means. It's all spent anyway. The value of that time is based on what you assign to it. In 10 years' time, it could be that Final Fantasy XIV will become a shadow of its former self, supported by an aging and shrinking player base and receiving paltry support from its publisher as resources are allocated to other more lucrative projects. Or perhaps it'll experience a revitalization not unlike World of Warcraft, which has transformed its gameplay, exploration, and systems to be almost unrecognizable and much, much better than ever before. Either way, I think I'll still be right here. Not out of some misplaced sense of loyalty or adoration, but because of what the game does right. In spite of all that's been said during Dawntrail, and everything that I've said, Final Fantasy XIV is still exceptional. If I were a betting man, then I'd put my money on the game's future being bright, even if the road is a little bumpy along the way. Before we say goodbye, tradition dictates that I leave you with a few unscripted words. First of all, a big shout out to JG Chowder on Patreon for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can get all videos 2 days early and ad-free for just $1 a month. It's a pretty good deal. Now, if you happen to be a streamer reacting to this in front of an audience, I see you, Zepla. I'm going to do you a favor and let you know that now's a good time to click away. Just a quick order of business and a few final words. Please let me know how you felt about the video using the like or the dislike button. Please comment if you have something to say. I love reading those. And of course, if you love MMOs as much as I do, then please subscribe. We got really great content coming your way. The last thing I want to say is that I'm not sure that I'm interested in making dedicated 14 content the way that I used to when I started the channel. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to elevate the kinds of content beyond just reading out patch notes or creating guides. So that would be a really fun creative challenge for me to take on, but I don't want to promise anything. Right now, what you can look forward to is a humongous essay piece about Final Fantasy XIII, as well as a video exploring Guild Wars 1, if you can believe it. Whatever I decide to do, I did just want to take a second to say thank you for helping me hit 5,000 subscribers. You guys are all fantastic. I appreciate the time and the attention. With all that said, minding my manners, of course. Thanks for watching.